Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here, once again based on one of your new suggestions. This one having to do with yet another entry involving France. I had talked about a previous video a couple of years back, or it was more along the lines of an invasion that was happening there in France with some UFOs. If you haven't had a chance to see that video, I'll include the link for it below. That way it'll give you a good recourse to catch up on that history and then compare it to what I'm going to talk about here. This one, though, is more of an isolated case, a very detailed one that once again showcases yet another variation associated with a different type of alien encountered with this UFO. It seems like there's just not a single set of two of them that are similar to each other. I still, to this day, have different aliens, different types of aliens to report on these UFO videos, and who knows, maybe I'll finally be able to see one of them that matches another one. But it has to do with this. You're looking at a representation of the alien now. It's known as the 1965 Valensole UFO encounter. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this very detailed encounter. So here's what happened. Back in 1965, specifically in July 1st to be more exact, there in Valensole, France, there was a farmer, a guy by the name of Maurice Massey, who had a very bizarre experience with not just the UFO, but some of the aliens that were there. Hence why it's called the Valensole encounter, because it occurred there in that specific city. For all intents and purposes, Maurice Massey was just a regular farmer. He was someone there that had lived there for a while. He was someone that hadn't had any other type of encounters involving UFOs. But on this fateful day, that's when he experienced this. The way he described it was actually almost like a normal situation at first, just based on his perspective. Because as he was there in his field, just doing whatever type of farm work he was, that's when he saw what he originally thought were two children standing in his field. Naturally, just wanting to see what was going on and make sure that they were okay, he went up to try to see them even closer, but that's when he saw two things that stood out. Number one, these children were not the children that looked like normal children. In fact, the closer that he got, that's when he saw that they were just completely different. They were obviously something from another world. In fact, here's essentially how he described them. He said that they had these very large bulbous heads, completely bald, and then also they had this pasty look associated with it, almost like a grayish look as well. And then their eyes were slanted, and they were slanted in obviously just very unique proportions, and they were almost bugging out, like they were just staring outside of whatever you could call their face there as well. On top of their clothing, they had what he described as overalls or coveralls of some sort, and then one of them was holding a strange device that, for lack of a better term, was in the shape of a tube. And so there they were, just looking about, and the way he described it even further, at first they didn't seem to be paying much attention to him. Who knows if they even observed him from the very beginning, but they were instead looking at some nearby plants within his field, and they were, what he stated, described as making some sort of weird grunting sounds. Who knows, this might be actually one of the first times that I've chronicled here in my videos where a sound was made by an alien. Normally, with a lot of the other experiences, they're pretty much silent, no? Like there's hardly anything as far as any vocalizations or other things that come from them. But here in this case, he described them as having these grunting sounds. And so there they were, just looking around that field, looking at those plants, and then one of them must have seen him approaching them, and then that's when the next thing he knew, he quickly saw this tube-like device pointing towards him, and then he was out of it. Like, he doesn't recall exactly what happened afterward as far as his situation. He just simply stated that as he was approaching them, that tube-like device was aimed towards him, and then he was disabled. He was out. When he finally awoke, that's when he next saw that these creatures were gone. Instead, they were presumably within the UFO, and he saw as they were flying away from that time period. And so if you thought that that was the end of it, no. As it turns out, what happened was during that time period where either he was hit by that ray or when he was essentially out of it, either unconscious or just didn't have much stuff to follow up on afterwards. He stated that he got some kind of message associated from these beings. Whatever these aliens were, they must have used something, either the technology they had or maybe even that large bulbous head that I was mentioning earlier, to receive a communication from them. He almost described it as like a spiritual experience because of what was going on. There was nothing really like in terms of a direct response that can be said, like what was it that they said to him in terms of communication. He just stated that they told him something. Whatever it was, he was able to at least discern that it was some form of communication, and because of it, he considered that area almost hallowed ground, almost like a spiritual ground afterward. He wanted to keep it forever within his family because he wanted to make sure that everything was going to be as is. Nothing was going to touch that land afterward. In fact, there was some physical evidence associated with that UFO and the landing that was there. And who knows, maybe even from the aliens and what they were doing with that tube-like device, because he said that afterward, there was nothing that could grow within that area for years to come. And on top of that, there were some unusual indentations within the ground as well. There was some kind of like landing gear impressions that were there from the UFO on the actual ground itself, and that's showcasing more proof as to what occurred there. Unfortunately, though, the farmer himself, Maurice Massey, remains the only eyewitness associated with this encounter. You pretty much have to take it at his word. That's why he was a little bit reluctant at first to report this situation, because it would basically be his word only as opposed to, let's say, multiple witnesses. But eventually he did move forward with it, and then that's when he started to tell people what was going on. That's when he saw or did drawings showcasing what he saw as far as not just the object but some of the aliens that were there as well. And as it turns out later on, there was a policeman, a guy by the name of Lonnie Zamora, who also, I guess, either saw the object or saw something similar to it. And then that's when he said, someone else has seen my UFO. In other words, the farmer said someone else has seen my UFO because of how close that particular UFO was compared to whatever Lonnie saw as well. I don't know if that policeman necessarily saw it himself or if he saw like a representation of it from someone else who showed it, and obviously they saw the connections. But either way, though, that's at least closest link to this UFO, whatever it was, having more than one type of encounter there within that location. But yeah, it was pretty interesting to read this because that was pretty much it. That's all that occurred for it, but there was a lot of detail associated with that encounter, and not just, of course, with what these quote-unquote children were in terms of these aliens, but also the UFO itself, the indentations, and whatever other type of physical stuff that was left on the ground, and then also the encounter that he had on a more personal level with not just whatever that ray was that hit him. In fact, he was stating that it might have been some sort of ray, but also the communication that came afterwards. But if anyone has any more information, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. And again, check everyone out my link, the one that I have as far as the other invasion from France, the UFOs, in other words, that invaded there in France. And then that way you'll get to see yet another type of encounter there. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.